going to talk to you about the science of Second World War, in particular food preservation. You may have heard that sugar was rationed during the Second World War. In this poster, it says how sugar should not be used in too little quantities. Now they must have had a really good reason for saying that. If you have a jar of jam and use half the amount of sugar that's recommended in the recipe, it'll go off within 2 weeks. Now that isn't a problem if it's only one jar of jam, but if you want your jam to last longer, you'd have to put at least 60% of your jam recipe as sugar. In 1940, the Women's Institute and women in their own kitchens were given 600 tons of precious sugar. During the war, food that was coming over by ship was very limited, but food from gardens and from farms was very productive. So most of the production was during the summertime, and they had to make that last all year round, and they did it with preservatives. By December 1940, they had made 150 tons of canned fruit, 160 tons of pulped fruit, and 3 million pounds of chutney. In order to make sure their hard work didn't go to waste, they would have preserved it. Once the fruit and sugar has been added to the pot, they need to be heated up. At 75 degrees, the yeasts and the moulds have been killed after a couple of minutes. By 100 degrees, the same temperature that water is boiled at, all the bacteria have also been killed. If we didn't do this, they would secrete digestive juices, which would soften and discolour the fruit. If you've ever seen mould on fruit or bread, you might have seen the spores, which can be green or black or grey, but most of the mould is actually underneath the surface in thread-like hyphae. Not all moulds are bad though. If you have a brush-shaped mould called penicillin, it's used as an antibiotic when we're sick, and it helps us get better. And another in the penicillin family you might find on hard cheese, and it gives the blue cheese that distinctive flavour. Bacteria are harder to kill than yeasts and moulds, and they don't thrive in acidic conditions, making fruit easier to preserve than vegetables. Bacteria are common in soil, so whenever you're preserving vegetables, you have to bring it up to a temperature of 125 degrees Celsius. Now I wouldn't be able to bring it up to that temperature using my open top pot, but I could do with using a pressure cooker. So as the pressure, the air inside, builds up to a pressure of 10 pounds, the temperature is then able to rise to 125 degrees Celsius and kill the bacteria.
I think the jam's ready. I'm checking to see if it's at the setting point. I can see it thicken on the spoon. By dropping a little onto a cold plate, it will thicken to the consistency of jam. When prodded with a finger, it will wrinkle.
The jam won't stay hot for long, so it's important that we get it into a clean container. The easiest way for me to do that here is to boil the jars. Make sure that your jar doesn't touch the bottom of the pot, or if you're using more than one jar, make sure that they are not touching each other. I'm using a glass disc here, but you can also use a cloth on the bottom. You could also sterilise your jars in a hot oven. These jars had rubber seals on them, and if they weren't available, they would make their own out of hot water bottles, out of old bicycle tyres, and they'd clean them, soak them overnight and sterilise them so that they could make a really good seal on their jars and keep the air out so they would preserve for longer. If they were using screw top lids, they could put the rubber just on the inside of the lid, and as they sterilised it, they'd keep the lid on loosely. The air would escape during the heating process, so that whenever it was finished sterilisation, they could easily tighten it down, keep the air from getting back in again, and it would preserve it for longer. They can also make their own lids using baking parchment and tie it in place. And to make sure it's thoroughly sealed and clean, they would put egg white in between.
Egg white doesn't go off because it has a natural antibacterial in it. To help preserve eggs all year round during the Second World War, they would dip them in a sealant called oat-egg. On the surface of the egg, there are little pores that allow the air in and out of the egg. It is how a chick survives if the egg has been fertilised. This air isn't an advantage though if you want to keep the egg fresh. Oat-egg seals out the air. They also sealed their jars with preserves from the air by using mutton or beef fat. And they put their walnuts in layers of sand. I hope they kept their shells on. If you were jarring apricots in syrup during the Second World War, they suggested that you cracked open the stone and added the kernel inside for a marzipan flavour. We now know that these are dangerous and shouldn't be eaten at all. I'm sure the apricots were delicious, but I recommend leaving out the kernels. Now the lid of the jar is airtight. As the jam cools, the air that was left inside will also cool. Hot air takes up more space than cold air, so as it shrinks, it will create a vacuum.
There are many ways of preserving food, apart from using our precious sugar. You can use acids such as vinegar, you can pack it in salt, or you can dry it. And during the Second World War, they had a preserving tablet, which was sulfur dioxide, which smells of farts. So if you went to use your vegetables, you had to open a window and boil it until the stink went away. Thank you so much from the Northern Ireland War Memorial Museum and myself, Claire. Have a great day.